And who's joining us online?
Online, we have Bob Esch, we have Deb Musselman from the Pennsylvania News Media Association, Elam Herr, Gail Landis from the Greater Reading Chamber, Jeffrey Roche from Pocono Health Systems, Joseph Cottonero, Catherine Claver, Mary Keenan from Weber Associates, Matt Briette, Maura Donnelly from PMA, Melissa Britcher, Michael Westover from Center for Literacy. We have Michael Yantis from Blue Cross of Northeastern Pennsylvania, Peter Calcara from PICPA, Peter Guttert from Dow Chemical Company, Scott Baker, Tim Phillips, Scott Zeloff, and Pam McCormick.
Thank you all for being with us. Great group this morning, special week, all kinds of events going on in the General Assembly, all kinds of events going on tonight with the Chambers of Commerce, all entertaining and talking to lawmakers. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that tomorrow night is the PEG dinner, so I hope you'll join us for that, as well as the fascinating seminar tomorrow afternoon, where we will have 5 authors talking about their perceptions of the last 50 years of Pennsylvania politics. Franklin Curry, Vince Caroci, John Baer, Brad Bumstead, and Terry Madonna. And then Larry Sabato will talk about his book, From the Kennedy Legacy, and what that's meant for American politics for the past 50 years. And then at the PEG dinner, Larry will be back with his crystal ball predictions for the 2014 elections. But meanwhile, there's more, more.
Can't be.
We have with us right now, for your entertainment and education, Drew Crompton, who is the Chief of Staff and Council President Pro Tem Joe Scarnati. Drew has been on Senate staff, he's now in his 21st year, has been instrumental in a number of major pieces of legislation, including the Marcellus shale legislation and the Lobbying Reform Act. He brings to us a great background in public policy and law, studied at Dickinson and at Widener Law, and then joining the Senate staff. So Drew, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks. As most of you know, I prefer to do Q&A. I think it's more helpful to you, and then I can test my knowledge on a variety of different subjects. It's funny. I was giving Taylor crud about the tiny little camera, which of course now there's an enormous camera sitting at the table, as if he brought it out for spite. But I said it's different camera, same little clock in front. So we'll all watch that together. I always enjoy this time because it's a smidge intimidating with the old wall clock staring you in the face as you look up. Look, I'll do 5 or 10 minutes on the budget, and then be happy to open up questions on budget or on topics du jour, including some of which Patty mentioned, but I'm glad to try to answer just about anything. I took some notes last night so as to be prepared. The first line that I wrote to myself is, April revenues look dreadful. And that was because there was children in the room. I would have used a better superlative for dreadful than that. Look, I think the bottom is about ready to drop out of revenues, and it's coming to a theater near all of us in about 2 or 3 days. It's hard to know how bad they are, but we will miss the mark according to our folks, and I don't want to be too specific because we won't know until the last day of collections, which won't be probably for 3 or 4 days from today, but we're hundreds of millions of dollars off the mark for April. And so just when people thought the news couldn't get a smidge worse, we found a way to make the news worse. They're bad. IFO does their report on May 1st. They'll include, if not all, but just about all of the deficit of April. I think realistically we're talking about ending the year now probably 400 million, somewhere in that park, below estimates. We were staggering along up until April. We were just about meeting the mark. There were some oddities we can talk about in the budget, bank shares, the liquor tax that was forwarded, that made numbers look a little happier than they actually were up until April 1st, but they weren't all that bad. But fast forward 72 hours from today, and I think you're going to hear the news that all of a sudden we took a downward spike for a number of reasons in revenues in April. Something that clearly we could not afford to do in light of trying to close the budget on June 30th. May revenues are small, so it is not likely we will make up much money in May. June revenues are not small. They're the third biggest collection month of the year, but quite frankly, if we're talking $400+ million to end the balance, you're obviously not going to come anywhere near making a big dent in, even if you have a good month of June. So that's the news of the day. That's going to be the chatter of the week, and probably, quite frankly, the chatter all the way until close of budget. Because right now, if you're looking at the governor's budget, even if you take all of the one-timers that were announced, we can talk about those if you like, and all the other remedial measures that the governor put in his February of 2014 budget, you're still looking at probably a deficit of $700-800 million when you account for the lag of 13-14 and what you do with projections for 14-15. So it is particularly dreary. It is more dreary than I think anyone expected it to be, and therefore creates challenges that we already knew we had and makes them probably 3 or 4 times more challenging. So that's my lovely start. Let's see what else is on my list.
Now for the bad news.
Yeah, I got a little bad news, don't worry. Well, I mean, I mentioned a couple other things in here. I mean, I think it is. I'll stay away from the issues of liquor and pensions. I imagine there'll be Q&A. If not, we can go back and do questions on those subjects, or I can do some narrative on those subjects if you want. I think it is unrealistic at this point not to be talking about new revenues. Senator Corman was on a TV show last week talking about new revenues. I think there are new revenues that are seemingly not accepted by everyone, and election year, and yes, as they all gasp and shake their fist, but there are going to be calculations for the executive branch and the legislative branch in light of the election, and I just think at this point, going back to some of the wells that we have been through for the last 3 years, and in my opinion, I think they were wells we had no other options to tap at the time, but I just don't see some of those alternatives suitable in the eyes of the members that I represent this year, as they have been necessary evils in the past. And if the question is, what about DPW? Maybe there is some realignment we can do in DPW, but once again, when we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, I don't think it's realistic to think that we're going to find them, all of that, or even a significant portion of that, through DPW corrections, and I've already talked about education. So those are the big 3, as you know. Why don't I take a break? The clock says I only went 8 minutes, but why don't we do some Q&A, see how that goes, and then, like I said, if there's subject matters that people don't touch on that they still want to hear me drone on about, I'm more than happy to do that.
Okay. All right. Now, Drew, since the Republicans have gutted education, and since the drillers pay no taxes, shouldn't we tax the drillers to fund our schools?
Yes. Next question. I think I think McCord's going a little light. I think if we could do it at 20%, we could really hammer down on some of that deficit.
We got your bigger camera. You want a bigger tax, huh?
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't know if we can get that tax into triple digits, but if you give the election a long enough time, look, I mean, I'll do 2 seconds on severance tax. It's somewhere my boss has been willing to have a conversation about in the past. Is he willing to have that conversation in the future? The answer is yes. Others would have to be willing to have a conversation. but it would have to be responsible. I mean, you know, this irresponsible proposals that are coming daily out of the Democratic gubernatorial governors folks are just not realistic. You know, I don't know what the rate should be, but I can tell you the priority of my boss is that the amount of money that is going to the locals should be sustained. We have had some conversations with the gas companies, and obviously one of their most important parts of all this is sustaining the local share, and that is because of, in light of the irresponsible opinion that came out of the Supreme Court on Act 13, the only thing that is keeping peace right now with the locals is that local share. It is allowing drilling to go forward in a relatively harmonious way, although obviously some municipalities are otherwise. But mostly across the state, we're still seeing peace, and I think that peace is generated into the dollars that are going through the locals in light of the impact fee that we put in place 3 years ago. So that is a non-negotiable in my boss's view. You know, if you want to talk about the state share, we could have that conversation. I think we're going to find out that state share has as much loyal participants or loyalists to the state aspect of the impact fee as the local does, but that's a conversation we're willing to have. And if there's additional revenue on top, then we could talk about where that goes as well. But I don't think it's realistic to have a high rate and an impact fee. I think you should take the impact fee out of the rate if you're going to do a rate. Look, it creates some certainty for the companies. I'm not here on their behalf by any means. I think they think the certainty is just fine the way it is. But if it's a responsible conversation that people want to have to ensure that the economic development across the Commonwealth continues at basically the rate that it's continuing today, and we can do some sort of severance tax with that principle still in place, I think it's something that my boss and others in our caucus, certainly not everyone, but others would be willing to have. But it's going to create some parameters, or we're going to go into that conversation with parameters. And look, who's kidding who? At some point, we're going to have this conversation. You know, now, next year, even with Governor Corbett for another 4 years, I think there's going to be, at some point, we're going to confront this conversation. That doesn't mean we haven't passed the severance tax. It just means, once again, sort of like the CSFT and other things, there will be conversations regarding these issues in light of the revenues that we're staring at. And, you know, besides the hue and cry of education, once we get the final number on April revenues, who's kidding who? The volume for severance is only going to go higher. But once again, if it's irresponsibility or an irresponsible rate with an irresponsible spend, it's not a conversation my boss is willing to have, and quite frankly, something that damages the economic development is once again a non-starter, as it is in the view of my boss.
Well, Drew, I just wanted to follow up. Obviously, my question was a little bit facetious, but that is obviously the line of argument that's going to shape the debate over the course of this political year. And, you know, I would argue that it's not just a lie, it's a compound lie. And considering that Congresswoman Schwartz is speaking at the Press Club luncheon today, like, how should the R's push back on that? That you haven't funded the schools, and that you haven't gotten enough money out of this industry?
Well, I mean, you know, questions are phrased in order to draw out the answers that people want to have. Look, I think people are losing the argument on whether we cut education. The gross amount we cut. Yes, we can blame Obama, we can blame the feds. They're all the right people to bear the bruises of why we had to decrease spending on education. But, you know, who's kidding who? People aren't buying it. That cement may not be set, but that cement is almost set. And so in my opinion, you talk about the reasons why you did what you did 3 years ago. I think Corbett does a pretty good job of that. But, you know, one of the things I think is lost in this, and maybe I'm changing subjects, but I'm perfectly willing to have more conversation about education cuts. The answer is is, you know, every poll we've taken statewide, and I've seen a lot of them, is jobs and education. And when I was talking to folks from the Corbett world and others the other day, I mean, imagine the drumbeat on Governor Corbett if the unemployment rate went from 6% when he took office to 8% today. He wouldn't be able to wake up in the morning and not read that as a headline. And instead, the opposite is true. He basically took office at 8%, and right now unemployment is somewhere around 6%. 150,000 new private sector jobs have been created under the Corbett administration. I wouldn't stop saying that until more than just the cows came home. The bottom line is he has a story to tell on economic development. He has a story to tell on jobs, creating jobs in the Commonwealth. And so when people look at cuts and say, well, they were cuts, they were arbitrary, they were irresponsible, they were frivolous, and they didn't do anything. Look, maybe Corbett created a better economic climate, maybe he didn't. And all the analysts can sit around in a room and talk about whether Corbett is to credit for that or not. But the bottom line is, that is what happened in Pennsylvania for the last 3 years. And on the Corbett administration, I think, have not done a good enough job talking about the unemployment rate. I know they tweet about it a lot. I follow their Twitter. But the bottom line is, shh, you're not allowed to laugh. I'm kidding. But, you know, but it's more than that. It's trying to brand this idea that the economics and the economic development in Pennsylvania is considerably better today than it was when Corbett took office. And if that meant you had to cut up front in order to have dividends later, 6% unemployment rate, I mean, come on, folks. Do you know what Governor Rendell would do with a 6% approval? I mean, 6%, that was his approval rating. I'm kidding. No, it wasn't. A 6% unemployment rate? I mean, so we gotta message that better. We gotta talk about that more. And I think they really do have a story to tell. And if it meant paying up front with benefits later, that I think is exactly what's playing out in the economic world of jobs in Pennsylvania. And I think he has a story to tell, and I think he needs to, we all need probably to put that on the forefront a little more than we already have. And that's how I would defend the bad decisions or the tough decisions that we all had to make collectively, the General Assembly and the Governor's office, in order to have results. And if people want to say that we have a 6% unemployment rate because of Obama, or we have 6% unemployment rate because of God knows what else, let them. But you bet every person in the free world would blame Corbett if we had an 8% today. So he might as well start taking credit for the 6% that we have.
Other questions?
We're not actually recording this, right?
Just between us and.
All right, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Very good.
Healthy PA Medicaid, another big topic.
Yep.
You know, something that you know, some states are opting into the offer from DC to expand Medicaid. Others are trying to do their own thing. As Pennsylvania is, we've applied for a waiver. There is some speculation in DC that the Obama administration might apply some politics in deciding about the waiver, looking at a governor whose polling is less than optimal for an incumbent. But where does the Senate, specifically Senate Republicans, stand on that, and what are the options, and how do we move forward?
Look, I think we've been quieter, I would say, because of the fact that majority of this, if not a very large majority of this, rests. Excuse me. My 2-year-old would just say I burped. She's very proud of that. Anyway, tough crowd.
Need the cookies.
Yeah, we need cookies. We need more than cookies. We've been relatively quiet because the obvious ball is in the court of the executive branch. But that doesn't mean we haven't been supportive. We thought we should go some route that would expand health services to those lower income folks in light of the fact that the feds have put a substantial amount of money on the table. The Corbett administration went the route of Healthy PA, and I think we've applauded that. Look, the folks that don't, going back to the same people that sit on the wings and don't want Corbett to have any successes, can't support Healthy PA. Because then they're giving kudos where they don't want to give kudos. So I understand that. I think the administration understands that. I think it's a good plan. I hope it gets approved. I would have liked them to have success on a couple of the other components of their plan. But look, you know how those waivers go. They're negotiations with the feds. I mean, we've done them quietly, and usually they don't get this much discussion or notoriety, but waivers are discussions with the feds. Feds have money in it. We have money in it. They sit down with a bunch of folks who know this subject matter better than I ever will, and they have nuanced discussions on what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. I think they're doing yeoman's work, and I hope it gets approved. I hope it gets approved with a majority, if not almost all, of the components that they initially proposed. And I think we have told the administration time and time again, including as recent as Friday, that we are at the ready to hopefully pass anything that they need to pass in order to implement whatever the agreement is between the state and the feds within the parameters of the Healthy PA plan that they came up with. So if there's components that have to be statutory changes, right now they look like there's very few, if any, but if there's statutory changes that we need to make in order to implement the grand agreement, I believe the majority, if not all our members, are willing to make those changes. And so, but at this point, they have not been itemized to us. At this point, we don't know what they are. We have some suspects, but we're waiting for the timeline, which hopefully is not going to be extended all that much further. I'll let them talk publicly about how their negotiations are going, but I would summarize it by saying that they are relatively optimistic that a Healthy PA can get approved. If people come from the top of the feds and blow it up, well, I hope they're exposed for doing that, because to Corbett's administration's credit, they are trying to expand services to a whole class of folks that don't have it now. And I think that's the essence of what the federal law wanted, and I think Corbett is meeting them a whole lot further than halfway on that, and I think the plan should be approved. It needs a couple tweaks, so be it, and if it needs legislation, we'll hopefully pass it by the end of June.
We've obviously talked a lot about the tough finances, and one of the drivers of that's the public pension liability issues. You sort of teased it. Is there any hope of getting something done by June 30 on that to help at least a little bit alleviate some of the pressure on the budget?
I hope so. I think priority right now for the next 2 weeks and maybe beyond, but hopefully for the next 2 weeks, is doing something on liquor out of the Senate. Hopefully it will be something that can get approval through the House, or something close to it can get approved.
Go ahead, take a little tangent for a minute. Tell us then about what liquor would look like first.
Well, I truly am not briefed on all the specifics of liquor. I think it's going to be, a scaled back plan from what the House passed. I don't think it's fair to call it watered down. I think people want wine options and beer options in grocery stores. Whether we expand any licenses or not, I think continues to remain an open issue. And whether, what pathway is set up in order for someday to try to get a bigger piece of the pie, that's something we had in place that we were ready to vote on last year, some sort of evaluation after a period of time in order to close state stores. What kind of component gets into the final mix on that, I believe, is still an open issue. Caucus is going to be today and maybe even tomorrow on liquor discussions in my caucus. So, that's where we are on liquor. There's some optimism that we could pass something this week. We have 2 weeks that we're back, so I think the most important part, hopefully, is to lift a liquor plan in the next 2 weeks. We'll see if that's successful, and if that is successful, and hopefully the House, as I said, could concur in something, either the plan or something close to the plan. Clearly, they've been briefed on what we've been talking about, so they have good working knowledge of the options that we're going through. That doesn't mean that they're all signed on. It just means that we haven't done this in a closet. But on the other hand, we still have to have further conversations with the House and the governor's office. But, that's always a balancing act when you're taking a plan to caucus and trying to let them have first dibs. So we'll see how that goes. But that's the plan, and liquor is the subject du jour for the next 2 weeks.
And there's been some confusion in the media. I mean, when we talk about a Senate plan, whose plan are we talking about?
Yours? No? Let's try. Very tough crowd. So look, I think it's a conglomerate, and we have built this plan in the caucus with a variety of members and a variety of input. I really couldn't give you a name on the plan if you made me. Senator Pileggi, Senator Scarnati, Senator McElhenney, others have been very active in carving up pieces of this plan. It's probably not a plan that they would build individually, but it's a plan that they're trying to build collectively. So I don't know whose name ultimately is going to be on the plan, but I think, there's been media reports over the last few months that Scarnati was putting principles together, Pileggi was putting principles together, Chuck McElhenney has principles that he wants to incorporate as well. So those are three, and I think there's others. But, now is we're getting close to game time, I think. We're going to go to caucus. We're going to have a conversation. It's probably going to be lengthy, and hopefully we can build a consensus of votes.
And are there things that obviously caucus didn't happen yet, but things that you think your caucus either has to have or cannot accept? Are the bright lines on either side of any parameters?
Look, the tough part of that question is it depends on who's answering the question. I mean, there are must-haves on some people's parts, whether they're all included or not, I don't know. And there's, we can't do that on the other side as well. I think, look, well, I'll say it this way. We're looking at consumer choice and allowing people to have more options than they have right now. We're not looking to completely upend the liquor system right now. That might not create warm and fuzzy in people around this room, but that's not where we're headed. But we're not just looking at allowing beer outlets to sell six-packs either. I mean, that may be a part of the plan, but my point is we're trying to look for middle ground. We're trying to do something substantial. But yes, it will be considered by some as less than what the House did. And that's just the nature of compromise. Because of the people in the caucus that have must-haves over here and must-not-dos over here, the attempt has been for a long time now to move to the middle, to expand consumer choice, allow consumers to buy alcohol in venues that they can't buy it now, and then reevaluate. I think it would be a significant achievement. It would be something we haven't done in a long, long time. But if the measure is always what the House bill was, then people can feel free to criticize the Senate plan as being less. But as my boss always reminds people, liquor stores in our district do not make money. They're losing propositions. Could private market come in and supplant that? Possibly, but they got to look at the outlets, and they wouldn't necessarily think the finances of those state stores are something that private market would want to do. Now, we can say that those state stores should not be allowed to operate at below margins, but the bottom line is they are, and we're not looking for a bill, Senator Scarnati is not looking for a bill that decreases choices in a district that already has minimum choice. So that's one of the principles of his. He has participated in this discussion, and the hope is that we can find the middle and pass something shortly out of the Senate.
So back to that easy topic of pensions.
Sure.
And there's two components there that interest a lot of people in this room. Yes, the state employee pension, but also for the locals. You know, what can we do for local municipalities? While dollar amount, it's smaller, perhaps in the aggregate, the impact on those communities is frankly greater. I mean, the state, you know, it's uncomfortable making the payments, it's hitting the budget, everything else, but it's not actually bankrupting us. I mean, at the municipal level, you know, we have municipalities in trouble. So
And
is
if we
there?
had a wave of municipal bankruptcies, that would make the current state fiscal position even worse.
It would. Look, fair question. I think the way I would answer it is the focus is going to be on the state pensions, both PSERS and SERS at this point. You know, I think there's a responsibility that we get ourselves in order. Look, I know there's lots of people looking at the local pension amounts, and I know the underfunded percentages in some of those municipalities for what they're underfunded are downright staggering. And almost hard to believe when you see that pensions are 85% unfunded on locals. It's hard to even grasp, but that's where their pension amounts are. But look, I think the focus is going to stay at the state. They're going to stay at the two big outlets that I just mentioned. Look, we want to do something. We hope there's enough people at the table at the end of the day to get a plan done. We want to, there's significant interest in reforming the pension plans in our caucus. It's almost, you know, it's a very loud clamoring in our caucus to do something, which is the most obvious. I mean, the most obvious option for us is to do a 401 for new employees or some variation thereof. We understand the carrying cost problem associated with that needs to be addressed. And if it means that we take some sort of hybrid approach that some of the House representatives have put forward, I think it's something that would garner pretty good support out of our caucus. It's the same problem we have with liquor, though. You know, we're operating on thin margins when it counts, when we're talking about votes. Look, 27-23 is a solid majority in our world. It's not as solid as we would like it to be, but it's a solid majority, except in the equation that you need 26 to pass something, and then it doesn't look quite as solid. So, you know, we're not getting Democratic support. We're not getting much Democratic support that we know of on liquor, or at least the plan that we're contemplating, and we're not likely going to get much support, if anything, on pension reform. It's just the way it is. I don't blame them for where they are, but that's where they are. They you know, they certainly haven't hid where they are on those two subjects. So, you know, that's just the dynamics, and therefore lifting product with 26 Republican votes is tight, and it's hard. I'm not whining. I'm just saying that's the way it is. And so, you know, we want to do a pension bill. We want to do a pension bill before the end of June. We hope there's enough folks around the table that can negotiate a final product. Yes, we need the savings in the budget of changing the collars, especially now more than ever. But, you know, it's very difficult to change the collars if you don't have reform. And, you know, our hope is we get there. You know, we're not as far on pensions as we should be. And that by that I mean on votes and momentum, not so much on the technical aspects. I think the bills are being worked out, even though they're hundreds of pages. I think they're being worked out. The real problem right now is building some momentum, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're committed to trying to do something on liquor, is to try to hopefully build that momentum for pensions come June.
Anything or anything
Questions from the web?
All right, another easy one. Act 13 was going along swimmingly until my good friend, the Chief Justice, weighed in.
Did you guys have lunch?
Not that day.
Yeah.
None of us had lunch with him on that day.
Yeah. So where do we go now? And you know, what does it mean? What can we fix it? And you know, you talk eloquently about how great the unemployment rate improvement has been, the 2% drop. And maybe even more importantly than the aggregate for the state, but where it's dropped. I mean, we have an unemployment rate in the northern tier and in western Pennsylvania that we haven't seen in decades. You know, in large measure because of what, natural gas, and then all the spin-offs from that industry, and in fact, the steel coming back to make the piping, you know, everything about it has regenerated jobs that people thought were gone in those regions. And now we have members of your caucus, as well as the other three caucuses, opting for a populist view of, well, gee, we ought to do everything municipality by municipality, including the pipelines that would get that gas out, get that gas to the marketplaces. So how do we reconcile that? How do we protect the environment, protect human health and safety, but also move forward economically?
That
and
seemed
do it
to
in a
be
legal framework.
That seemed to be a compound question.
You may
Take
break
bits
it
and
apart.
pieces.
Multifaceted.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes. Feel free to break it up.
Look, I one of the reasons why I believe in a divine creator is he put shale in the parts of Pennsylvania that actually want it. You know, it was smart. It wasn't, you know, it's forward thinking. That rock has been around for a long time, and he knew that ultimately the places that my boss and others represent would welcome the opportunity to dig a hole for a mile or 2 miles down and a mile or 2 miles east or west in order to blow it up so we could pull gas out of the ground. That would not be necessarily a welcome endeavor in all parts of the Commonwealth. So we have that going for us. Look, I think the unemployment rate does, in fact, have something to do with the fact that we have been spirited in our belief that this is good economic development all over the Commonwealth. Others still are not necessarily convinced. Act 13, as it relates to the zoning, I have been optimistic, somewhat optimistic, that the Supreme Court holding in Act 13 will ultimately, in 10 years or 15 years from now, be an anomaly. I don't think it's going to have the impact on some of our other related but different types of exploration across the Commonwealth that some worry that it does. Look, there's always a chance that it does. But it's an anomaly. It's also a very well-written anomaly. And that is the problem that we have as a General Assembly. That is the problem that we have in our office, who would like to look at remedial ways of going about the zoning issue. And the problem is that they were smart. They took constitutional provisions and applied them against Act 13. If they would have just taken the zoning and said, well, no, tis, you can't do this, and tis, you can't do that, and gee, you wrote this statute wrong, and you wrote this provision wrong, and gee, you preempted regs that you shouldn't have preempted, and blah, blah, blah. We could take that mess and look at it and go, all right, what's our next move? The problem is they took a bunch of, my opinion, irrelevant and unused constitutional provisions and slapped them against Act 13. Why? To box us. Oh yeah, go ahead, smarty pants. You want to change? You want to do something in this world? Change the Constitution. Well, you know, the likelihood of that is almost impossible as it relates to these concepts. So we are stuck in a holding ground right now because most of them, you know, whether it's due process, whether it's Article 1, Section 27 on the environmental provision, these were constitutional provisions that got slapped against us. We believed it was an issue of whether or not we could tell the locals to change zoning. We gave them a right. We took away some of that right. We thought the issue was as simple as that. The Supreme Court didn't want to decide that issue. They wanted to take constitutional provisions to box us. They did it. Congrats. You know, what are you going to say? So now what's our remedy? I think there's little ways that we can nibble back on some of these zoning issues. I think the pipeline is a separate issue, but we could talk about that. But on the zoning, I think there's ways that we can address it. But I won't lie, it's hard. But you know, that's the pile of crap that we were left under the 100-page plus decision. And there's not a lot of remedies going forward. Thankfully, some zoning is still in place. Thankfully, we still have the local funding that I talked about before that keeps some peace. I still think we could get the PUC to do a couple additional measures as it relates to their powers under Act 13 that might help us on zoning. But, we got to be careful. I mean, I know everybody thinks, that it's like comical to think that these companies would leave. But they make decisions every day. And look, I don't think if we pass something that all of a sudden every well comes out of the ground. I've never said that. My boss doesn't believe that. But the bottom line is it's incremental. We've had a very good 3 years of incremental progress with this industry. I don't understand why we want to shoot ourselves in the foot. But, some people are still not happy unless you get them out and make them stop. I will say, let me say one last thing. Let me say one last thing on a polling issue that I found interesting, that we did a statewide poll, and we asked the question this: do you think the industry is basically crapping up the planet, or do you think that it's creating jobs? The issue was a smidge more eloquent, or the question was a smidge more eloquent than that, but it was the two options, and it was, you could pick a not sure, but you don't get an option C. And about 60% of the people thought it's a job creating industry that should basically, my words, but their words sort of, applauded. About 35% of the people polled still believe that they're just effing the planet. But my point is, the reason why I highlight that is because of the fact that that's progress. I know that sounds crazy, and I don't have the political data from 3 years ago, but I can guess what it was. 3 or 4 years ago, if you asked people that question on whether it was about jobs or the environment, they would have done the environment at least 2 to 1. So over the 3 years, at least, the kudos that I can offer for people like you guys, like the industry, like others, like locals, they're starting to make the case that this isn't just about ripping up the planet. This is about something that is creating jobs, hopefully in an environmentally, generally safe way. And that message statewide is starting to seep in. That doesn't mean they don't want a severance tax. It just means that people are starting to view this industry differently, and I honestly think that that's the success of the last 3 or 4 years.
Right. Well, so, and I appreciate your observation that we can't just take for granted that the companies don't change their strategies, change where they drill. But part of that has also got to be impacted by the inability to get the transmission lines in to get the gas out, because they can drill all they want. If they can't get the gas to market, they can't sell it, and at a certain point you can only store so much.
Yes.
And those lines unfortunately go through in some of those areas that the good Lord did not bless with the desire to want the industry. So we have the difficulties there, of the pipelines now at this point, and the manufacturing that comes from processing the material, making it into other products, where, Berks County, people trying to shut down a plant that would use exactly what we said. Let's use the natural gas, get the value add here. Let's not just pump it and sell it, but do something with it and add value. In a very Republican area, in an industrial park. So I'm somewhat at a loss to explain the thought process of the people, but politically and public policy-wise, I don't know how we move forward.
The one thing I'll say about pipelines is that Act 13 was pretty smart. We didn't get overly in-depth on the pipeline issue, and we stayed out of the way. I thought that would be subsequent legislation. We have been smart generally to stay out. I mean, obviously, as most of you know, if not all of you know, that pipelines is negotiated private deals. And hopefully they don't have to go 7 miles to go 1 mile in order to find a way to get it to market. But to the degree that they can negotiate that underground space with private lease owners or companies or what have you, they've been working. And look, perhaps there's still too much consternation on pipelines, but I think the one thing that we can do that generally helps the industry and the economic development as it relates to pipelines is to stay out of the way. If they can continue these leases, now look, I'm not answering for Berks, but I'm saying that a lot of Mark West and lots of other companies are coming in, spending billions of dollars developing this pipeline, and they've developed it in the last 3 or 4 years. Yes, they still got a long way to go. But as I always said, if you can find a way to get a pipeline through Manhattan, you can find a way to get a pipeline through most of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And if they all of a sudden they woke up in New York City that natural gas is a godsend to the people living in the Upper West Side, we should find a way to get it through most of the areas of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Maybe pipeline's got to go a little longer than they'd rather in order to find the sweet spot on where it needs to get maneuvered. But honestly, I think it's doable. And as long as we don't over-regulate the issue of pipelines, I think in 3 years from now, they're going to have the same success that they've had in the last 3 years.
Chris?
I am not aware of an extraction tax being applied to or talked about being applied to the other extraction industries we've had in this state. Oil, regular natural gas, coal, timber, water. What makes the Marcellus so special that the conversation now seems to be not if, but when?
I mean, the obvious answer is a lousy one, and that's the PR. I mean, but part of it is that. I'm not going to sit here and say that, people don't have the sights set on those guys in a different way and than coal or limestone, or you pick your resource of choice. Look, the problem is, regardless of applicability, it is true that most, if not all, other states tax the severance of natural gas. That is where the PR gets very difficult. We can talk about our high corporate taxes. We can talk about the impact fee. All of them, in my opinion, should be incorporated in the discussion if we're going to do a severance tax. What are they paying now? What are you going to do with the impact fee? All those issues are relevant. The problem is the PR is very difficult on the issue that we are an anomaly, and because we insisted on calling our impact fee a fee, we created the continued anomaly. Yes, you're right. There are not a lot of people that want to throw a 2%, a 5%, a 10% tax on coal and limestone and what have you. That's just the world we live in. Look, do the natural gas companies try to push back and make it broader applicability? There's risk involved in that, but perhaps they will. But it's a fair point. I know it's out there. It makes the feathers of the industry quite angry in light of this applicability being targeted just for them. But I don't know if that's going to change.
Well, there's something else that ruffles feathers in that other states that have a severance tax that's applied to natural gas, that there are abatements, that the states recognize periods for reclaiming the investment capital that went into the well in the first place, and there hasn't been any discussion that I've heard from the various proponents of a severance tax about recognize, okay, well, we don't have this particular tax where other states do. He who says A must say B. If we're going to have one of these taxes that other states have, shouldn't they be structured the way they are in Texas and Oklahoma and so on?
Look, I'm familiar with Texas and Oklahoma and Arkansas and others who have a different modeling of rate. It's not a subject matter that I think my boss and others who would have a conversation are willing to have a conversation about until there's a real conversation.
Yeah.
I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not going to talk about abatements. We're not going to talk about rates. We're not going to talk about structure unless people are willing to have that conversation. If people want to have that conversation and model it off another state or allow some sort of post-production issue or an abatement of a rate for a period of time or all these different ways that, yes, other states have done it, that's a conversation that I think is absolutely relevant at the time that you have a serious conversation about this.
Yeah, and
Your point's very well taken. But I mean, we're not going to get in a room with ourselves.
Yeah.
And we're not going to walk around and go, well, gee, should we use Texas, Drew, or should we use Arkansas?
Yeah.
Or, gee, today I really like Oklahoma. I mean, the point is, if people want to have a conversation, we will, and we do understand the different ways that the state have applied. I don't completely understand the way Texas applies the model. I think you actually have to be a PhD to discern what their structure of that tax
Yeah.
really is.
Yeah.
But that being said, we'll bring in a couple PhD friends who can figure out Texas.
Yeah.
But that's a conversation that I really think is a cart before the horse at this
Absolutely.
point.
But like a week ago, when Miriam Fox was sitting in this chair, it was a money.
How'd she do? Just
you know,
out of rival sort of.
Yeah, no. I mean, yeah. But it's
And
like
better than the guy after her? Is that what you?
But she's got, she's here. It's
Almost,
like, hey,
sorry.
we want.
I almost got it there.
We want a severance tax on two axes so that it's both volume and market price. Money. I mean, it's craziness. It's leprechaun gold. It's not real.
Agreed.
So anyway, Dave.
Dave McCorkle has some leprechaun gold. So.
That's good. Do you want to opine on budget timing this year? Will we have one by June 30th, or
Yes.
might you be around in July?
I've told people, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but I will, because there's a myriad of things I've said in the last 50 minutes that I shouldn't have said. So why stop now?
And then you threw things.
And then I threw things out of anger. Did you see how Drew was pissed off at PMA? I heard he started throwing stuff.
Well, I didn't actually see it because the camera's not working, but. Oh, we're
one is.
Oh, that one is. No, don't worry. We're all covered. Don't worry.
3D.
Look, I think we'll finish by June 30th. I think we're obliged, and I think there's a lot of reasons where I could say that I believe we will finish by June 30th. I would not book vacations for July 2015, however. I think next year's budget is going to be brutal.
I've got 11:58 in the pool, in the office pool, though, for June 30.
Of this year.
Yeah.
I would have taken the under had it not been for April revenues.
Yeah.
I might take the over.
11:59.
The 11:59 in light of April's revenues. I think we'll be fine. I mean, I think we all feel like it's something we can't miss. Doesn't mean it's pretty. It just means it's done.
Do you have any idea why April revenues were bad?
Yeah, we're trying to get to
I
the
mean,
bottom
we
of
talked
it.
about weather in other months, but
Yeah, I know. And quite honestly, from what people are telling me at this point, it's not tax returns. They seem to be on par with projections. So obviously it's everything else, because when you're talking about that substantial of a hit it into the woods type of tee shot, and you take PIT out of the mix, I'm not saying PIT's coming in right at the right point, but it didn't seem like that was the root of the problem.
Well, unless something changed, corporate taxes were ahead of estimates.
Yeah, something changed.
So.
Yes, that's part of the problem. I mean, that is part of the problem. Corporate is down. Some of the other taxes are down. It's it's quarterly for or it's a mark for businesses in April too. But right now, from what I've told, it's not personal income. Now that may add to it. Look, with three collection days left, it's actually more time than it sounds, and especially when a lot of taxes come on the day they're due. You're literally opening envelopes as we sit, but that prognosis of either being way ahead or way behind for personal income tax was not the case. At least that's what I hear.
Final topic here, but trying to move to something now for something completely different.
Uh-huh.
We have a new president coming on board at Penn State. Later this year, a new chancellor at Pitt. We already have a new chancellor of state system of higher education. So a lot of new people there, people in the legislature looking at the roles of the historic role of our state universities. Is there any reform out there on higher ed as we look at things and say, well, gee, how can we do things better? How can we save money? How can we use the state resources more effectively? Yours is a caucus that's always cared very much about all of our state-related and state-owned universities. So any thoughts of using this time of transition and change to move forward with some kind of reform there?
Look, our state system specifically, before you get to the state relateds, they need an overhaul. I mean, we have the universities that some want to succeed from the state system, and because the Westchesters and others are incredibly dynamic, and we have those that are not anywhere in the ballpark of drawing the resources, the students, such as Mansfield, that's in my boss's district, which is, quite frankly, kindly struggling. So, I think we are trying to give the new state system president some time. He looks like he sounds as if he wants to tackle these issues on the state system side, and we welcome it. Obviously, we don't want Mansfield to go anywhere, but I think the only way you make Mansfield vibrant is to pick market thing or subjects that they can do and stress those. They are going to they need to have more of a streamlined approach than has been in that system and in that particular university in the past. I mean, so I think he understands the substance of the fact that we have universities in our state system that are in radically different places right now, and I hope that he comes with a whole broad list of how to address those issues. But I think people that I work for are giving him some space to do that, and then it's going to rise and fall on whether we have the gumption to address those issues. I think state relateds are different. I think the retirement of Nuremberg in Pittsburgh is huge. He's a man that has become an icon both in the capital and in the Pittsburgh region. You can't say enough good things about the fella. The bottom line is his presence for not just Pitt, but for all the state relateds is going to be immensely missed. He is truly a gentleman and a scholar, and I just think that we have a lot, the shoes to fill, not just for his university, but for all four of those universities is enormous. And, we're just going to have to see where we go with state system. Anything, obviously, that minute you mentioned state system, all you can do is talk about Penn State for what they're trying to do. If we had more time, we could talk about Corman's lawsuit and what it could mean to the consent decree and everything as it relates to Penn State. We're at crossroads with that issue right now, and the Commonwealth Court obviously gave Corman and McCord an enormous victory against the NCAA, and how that plays out is, quite frankly, probably a college class in itself, and it's going to be a fascinating ride as you watch the rest of that unfold. Has already been interesting. It's going to get more interesting as we go. And so as it relates to greater reform for state relateds, I think until the dust settles in Pittsburgh and the dust settles with the NCAA as it relates to Penn State, I don't think necessarily, in my opinion, you're going to see any substantial reforms of the state relateds, at least right now.
Okay, well, we'll have to leave it there. Maybe we'll bring you back for that one class. Thank you very much.
Thank you.